It's time to show you why the Sword and Shield is the jack of all trades and master of all weapons. That's right, a lot of you guys have been asking me for my builds, so in today's video I'm going to be showing you the strongest builds for the Sword and Shield. I'll be covering elemental damage, raw damage, status ailments, as well as some more comfortable and easily affordable options, so that even if you don't have some of the best decorations, you can still dish out a lot of damage consistently with these builds. My SnS advanced guide is still in the works, but I'll be sure to mention how to optimally play with each different build so that you can be as effective as possible. With that being said, hello everyone, my name is Dark Hero and let's talk about the Sword and Shield. Now, something to consider about the Sword and Shield and the builds that we're going to be making is that many of these will share different armor pieces so as to have the best skills available, so I wouldn't recommend you to skip ahead in the chapters of the video as you might be missing some explanations. Now first we'll be going over the blueprint for a lot of different builds that you're going to be making, whether it's builds focused on elemental damage or raw damage. The raw builds are naturally sets that are focused on dealing as much raw damage as possible, not caring about the monster's elemental weakness, but also occasionally applying status ailments depending on the weapon you have. And then we have the elemental builds. These are mixed sets that will focus on improving your elemental damage as much as possible to give you an advantage against monsters that are weak to certain elements. So naturally you will want to create various different versions of this same set depending on the element you're trying to use. Luckily for you, however, the base of the build is still going to be the same. The armor pieces we're going to be using are going to be the Guardian Ebony Helm, the Arc Vulcan Mail, the Guardian Ebony Braces, Arc Vulcan Coil, and the Udrig Greaves. And you'll want to craft the beta version for each of the different armor pieces so as to have as many decoration slots as possible to be able to better customize your build. This will give us the following skills. First, level 4, Weakness Exploit level 3, Divine Blessing level 1, Recovery Speed level 1, Speed Sharpening level 1, and Windproof level 1. Additionally, we also get a couple of set bonuses, those being Burst Boost 1, which will extend the duration of burst and increase our attack by 3 points while burst is active, and Arc Veld Hunger will provide us with Hasten Recovery 1, which will effectively work as additional healing over time so long as we keep attacking the monster. We're then going to be adding the Exploiter Charm 2 to get 2 additional levels in Weakness Exploit, maxing out the skill at level 5. Weakness Exploit is a fantastic skill that at level 5 will increase your affinity by 30% provided that you are hitting a monster's weak spot. And don't worry, these weak points aren't very limited. As a matter of fact, they're going to be most of the body of the monster and are likely the parts that you are already attacking, such as the head, the tail, so on and so forth. Weakness Exploit level 5 also provides you with an additional 20% affinity whenever you are attacking wounds. The secondary bonus is going to be just that, a bonus that will occasionally help us with our affinity, although it's not going to be active for most of the hunt, as more often than not you're going to be breaking a monster's wound in the very same combo that you created. And now it's time to add our decorations. We're going to be adding 1 Chain Jewel, 3 Mighty Jewels, 3 Protection Jewels, 1 Physique Jewel, and we are left with a couple of options for our final one. That said, let's go through our skill selection first. Maximum Might level 3 is an incredibly efficient skill, giving us 30% affinity so long as we keep our stamina full at all times. This works quite well for the Sword and Shield, as the only actions that consume your stamina would be your backstep or blocking an incoming attack. Additionally, you only lose the maximum might effect if your stamina isn't full for around 2 seconds, as the game gives you a limited time window where if you are able to regenerate your stamina back up to full, you get to maintain the effect. This combines quite well with Constitution, a level 1 decoration that can reduce the stamina depletion by 10% for each level that we put into the skill. Now, I have personally chosen to go for Divine Blessing level 3, as we already get 1 level of Divine Blessing from our armor pieces, and Divine Blessing level 3 is, in my opinion, one of the best defensive skills in the entire game. Definitely the most efficient defensive skill, as you only need 3 level 1 decorations, and each time that you take damage, including when you block an attack, there is a 50% chance to reduce the damage that you take. As such, while we have 2 Physique Jewels to reach Constitution level 2, you would be able to reach Constitution level 4 by replacing those 2 Protection Jewels, though I do not think that it's necessary, and I would much rather have the extra survivability from having Divine Blessing. Now, as I mentioned before, for our final level 3 decoration slot, there's a few different options that you can run, and those would be Agitator, Latent Power, Flayer, and Ambush. Agitator provides you with a flak attack boost, along with additional affinity so long as the monster is enraged. In my opinion, Agitator is a lot worse compared to what it was back in Monster Hunter World Iceborne, as back then we could utilize the Clutch Claw to essentially guarantee that we would have a permanent uptime on the monster being enraged, therefore making the skill Agitator a lot more useful. So because you won't be having the monster enraged for a very large amount of the hunt, I don't think the skill is quite as good. Latent power is also quite good, but it requires you to take a certain amount of damage or a certain amount of time to have passed throughout the hunt, and the bonus you get out of it at level 1 isn't all that meaningful, only giving you 10% affinity and a 30% reduction in your stamina depletion rate. And that leaves us with Flare and Ambush. Flare is quite a good skill, although it is bugged at the moment. This skill makes it so that you can inflict wounds a little bit quicker on the monsters and also deal some extra damage, and those extra procs of damage are actually quite meaningful and add up over time. Now Flare is bugged in the sense that in the review period that me and many others played before the game came out, Flare 5 was an incredible skill, but at the moment, Flare level 2 not only allows you to create wounds much quicker, but the damage you deal with the skill is also increased. So while the skill is currently bugged, the best way to actually go about this if you simply wanted to max out your damage would actually be to go with Flare and replace your Chain Jewel with an additional level of Flare to reach Flare level 2. Alternatively, you could go for Ambush, and you would be wasting a level 3 decoration slot on a level 2 decoration, but Ambush is very powerful, giving you 5% additional attack after you perform a sneak attack. And the best thing about it is that you can do it multiple times throughout the hunt, and you can even force additional sneak attacks on the monster by utilizing the Ghillie Mantle. Still, it requires some extra effort to use this skill, but Ambush is one of those skills that is very overlooked and very underappreciated in my opinion. And now it's time to talk about the weapons. Naturally, the Artian weapons are going to be your best selection for most of it, but I will be giving you some recommendations outside of the Artian weapons so you have a bigger selection to pick from. And we are starting with the Raw builds, looking at the Ajarakan Sword and Shield first. This is a fantastic sword and shield that not only looks good, but also has a very high attack stat of 210, 10% affinity with a decent amount of white sharpness, very good decoration slots having level 3, level 2 and level 1, 180 blast, and comes with the skill Offensive Guard, which is one of the best to utilize on the sword and shield. In my opinion, Offensive Guard is one of the very best skills in the entire game, as it provides you with a 15% attack boost after you block an incoming attack. And the best part about it is that the timing is actually very forgiving. You don't need to do a perfect block or anything. As you can see from the background, I can do a very delayed block and I still get the benefit from Offensive Guard. And with the very low commitment of the sword and shield's quick attacks, you're very easily able to follow up any attack with a block, therefore being able to easily maintain uptime on Offensive Guard. As for the decorations, despite this weapon already having a decent amount of sharpness, we want to make sure that we maintain that white sharpness for as long as possible, so we're going to be looking for any decorations that can help us with this. As such, one of the best options would be to go for a Razor Sharp 3 with Handicraft decoration. So with Razor Sharp at level 3, you will have a 50% chance of not losing any sharpness, and you will gain 10 additional white sharpness units on the sword and shield from Handicraft. Now you could alternatively look for a critical status decoration that would increase the chance of you triggering the blast procs as you land critical hits on the monster. And while critical status is a decent skill to pick up, it doesn't quite compare to the rest of the options, because if you really want to deal good damage with this weapon, then you will want to go for critical boost 3 by having a level 2 and level 1 decorations, by equipping both a level 2 and a level 1 decorations, increasing the damage that you deal with your critical hits by 34%. Now it should be noted that you could treat critical boost as a one-point wonder, simply put a singular point to get that 28% additional damage, and then use that level 2 decoration slot however you see fit. You could add blast attack for example, but you will simply be dealing more damage by having critical boost on the weapon. Another very powerful raw option would be to go for the Queen Rapier, the Rathian Sword and Shield, that also has a very high 210 base attack, 15% affinity, so 5 more than the previous weapon, 180 poison elements, and has more white sharpness than the Ajarakan Sword and Shield, and comes with the skills critical status level 3 and poison duration up, which will extend the period of the poison effect by 20%. The problem with this weapon is that you don't have the perfect amount of decorations to put in Offensive Guard, unless you go with something like this, that is a Guardian and Handicraft decoration, which would give you a level 3 Offensive Guard and only 1 level of Handicraft, but you would end up burning through your sharpness pretty quickly. That said, you're still going to be fine because of the additional sharpness that the Queen Rapier has, but if you're trying to defeat a monster as quickly as possible without the monster running away, you're going to run into that scenario where at some point you will run into blue sharpness and you're going to be dealing less damage. The final raw weapon I want to talk about is going to be the Artian Sword and Shield, this time the paralysis version, as the Artian Sword and Shield comes with a decent amount of paralysis, and of course you have those 3 level 3 decoration slots which are just so powerful. powerful. And given how customizable this one is, you actually have a couple of different options. Now, as you can see on my production bonus, I only have attack infusions. I did it with 3 attack infusions, and for my reinforcement bonus, I have 2 sharpness boosts, 2 attack boosts, and 1 elemental boost. Ideally, that elemental boost would also be an attack boost, but I always like to have 2 sharpness there to not have to sharpen my weapon in the middle of the hunt. Now, because I have that additional sharpness, I am able to go with the aforementioned Guardian 3 and Handicraft 1 decoration. That is going to give me offensive guard level 3 and 1 level of handicraft, and then I use the remaining 6 slots in an honestly pretty stupid but effective way, which is to put 5 levels of critical boost, giving me 40% additional damage whenever I land a crit on the monster. And the damage output that you'll be able to get from this is going to be insane. Additionally, because this is a paralysis weapon, whenever you paralyze the monster, you're going to be able to target the weaker parts very easily, and some of the fastest kill times that I've had in this game have been with the paralysis sword and shield. You can of course also go for critical status if you want to get more paralysis procs, or of course simply go for paralysis attack, though me personally I found it to be much more effective to go for critical boost, though of course if you're fighting in multiplayer, or if you simply want to paralyze more often, then go for this decoration. Of course you could also replace the blast sword and shield and the poison sword and shield with their Artian weapons, but this is just to show you that those two are very viable options that I think are very competitive, and you don't need to go through the Artian crafting system, as you have 2 very viable alternatives right there. And honestly, we don't have layered weapons as well, so it's nice to get to use a different weapon design every once in a while. Speaking of which, it's time to talk about the elemental weapons for the more elemental focused builds, and for these builds, the Artian weapons also end up being the best in slot, so I do want to give a shout out to a couple of different alternatives. Now, one thing to note about the elemental sword and shields is that you will always want to go for the sword attacks and will never want to go for the shield bash, as you can never deal elemental damage with it. Now, that is also true of the status build, so if you're using the blast, the poison, or the paralysis sword and shield, if you go for the shield bash attacks, you're not going to be building any ailment by doing this, and their motion values aren't also very high, but because the focus of that build is around doing as much raw damage as possible, it's not too bad if you go for the shield bash attacks. It's just that those attacks aren't quite as powerful, and also for the same reason, going for the perfect rush isn't also ideal with the elemental build, as you end up doing a lot of hits with the shield, and some of these attacks just don't have very good motion values. That is something for you to keep in mind, so try to stick with the sword with especially the elemental builds. Though that said, if you haven't landed a single KO on the monster, you can still go for a cheeky falling bash into shield bash combo, trying to get 1 KO, as you can very easily proc 1 KO per hunt, like this, but I would personally never use my shield again after getting a single KO. So for the elemental weapons, you should naturally try to look up a monster's weakness before you go on a hunt, and try to match it with the element of your own weapon. That said, if you don't want to go ahead and craft an Artian weapon, here's some of the alternatives that are actually quite good. The Jin the Hutt sword and shield is one of my absolute favorites, as its model is actually a flail and not a sword, and it has physics, so it's a lot of fun to use, and the weapon itself isn't particularly bad. It has again 210 attack with white sharpness and 350 ice element, which is a ton, definitely on the higher number compared to all of the other weapons, and it has decent decoration slots. The worst part about it is that it has a low amount of white sharpness, and that is of course incredibly important, and the skill it comes with, guard level 3, isn't all that amazing. I personally would never go out of my way to have guard on my sword and shield, as the only thing it does is decrease the impact of attacks and reduce the stamina depletion whenever you block an attack, and if you perfect guard, you don't even need to have the skill guard, so I would much rather have something like offensive guard, for example. For fire, the Rathel's sword and shield, the Corona, is also really powerful, with 10% affinity, 250 fire, about the same white sharpness as the Jin the Hutt sword and shield, and the same decoration slots, but as you can see, it comes with critical boost level 3, which is a fantastic skill to have. As such, you can easily max out critical boost by just putting in a level 2 critical boost on the weapon, and that is going to allow you to deal a lot of damage with it. The Gormagala sword and shield is also amazing, having 210 attack, 20% affinity with a good amount of white sharpness, and 200 dragon element with the skill critical element. And this skill is somewhat controversial at the moment, because while it does function, the amount of extra elemental damage that you deal with it really isn't very meaningful, and a lot of times you'll find that it's better to go for simply crit boost or raw attack damage increase over using critical element. It should also be noted that depending on the monster you're hunting, elemental damage damage is going to be better or worse against that monster. It's a lot more important to take a look at the monster's hit zone values compared to how much element your own weapon has, as that is going to be the main factor when it comes to them taking more elemental damage. I'm gonna make a whole video talking about crit boost versus crit element, but that is something to consider here. And lastly, the Blagonga Sword and Shield is also quite good, having 230 raw attack, a very high number, though the problems are that it comes with critical draw level 2, which is a skill that is rarely going to be active. I would much rather it having offensive guard level 3 and not level 1, and it also doesn't have a lot of white sharpness and negative 10% affinity, so you're going to need to play around that, but I suspect that as we get better armor sets in the future, there's a chance that this weapon might become one of the better ones, as we're able to add even more affinity onto our builds. Now, as for the Artian weapons, which again in my opinion are the best in slot, you ideally want to still have 3 attack infusions, and for the reinforcement bonus, 4 attack boosts with 1 sharpness or 3 attack boosts with 2 sharpness would be the ideal, because again, you're seemingly doing a lot more damage with raw damage versus elemental damage. So you still want to have the elemental damage on top when you can, which of course you can with the elemental weapons. As you can see, this one doesn't quite have the perfect reinforcement bonuses, but that's what you would be looking for. Now for our dragon elemental build, we're actually going to have a different build. As you can see, we're using the Arc Vulcan helm, 3-piece Gormagalo with the chest, the vambraces and the waist, and the Arc Vulcan greaves. And for our talisman, we're using the elemental convert charm. I then add a critical jewel 3, offensive guard 3 with handicraft, and dragon attack 3 with handicraft as well, which at this point is overkill with 2 sharpness boosts, which is why I think having a single one would be ideal. Or alternatively, I could go for dragon attack 3 with critical element 1. This would give me a lot of the very powerful skills that we talked about before, such as crit boost 3, offensive guard 3, dragon attack 3 to deal more dragon damage, and critical element 1 more so as a bonus, because again, you don't get really a lot more damage out of it, but you can get it together with the dragon gem, so that is an added bonus. Now as you can see, I have critical element, latent power, and convert element, together with the frenzy bonus from having the 3-piece Gormagala. When you have all of these bonuses active at the same time, let's go ahead and get the Gormagala bonus active. Like this. As you can see, you end up with 75% affinity, and your dragon element is capped at 660. So if you want to deal as much dragon damage as possible, this would be the way to do it. The problem with this build, however, is that a lot of these skills are conditional, with latent power taking a little bit of time until it is active or requiring you to take damage to activate it, though there isn't a cool interaction with the corrupted mental to where you can get it to activate latent power a lot earlier. I think it's around 90 seconds earlier, making it a lot easier for you to get that 40% affinity from this skill. Convert element also requires you to get hit to get that bonus, so if you block an attack with your shield, you're going to get the benefit from convert element. And naturally, because we have 3 pieces from Gormagala, we're going to get hit with a frenzy virus, which is going to give us additional affinity, especially with antivirus on top, and coalescence is going to further boost our elemental damage. That said, you could always opt to go for the same armor set that I showed you before, with the same skills and everything, and then on the weapon decoration you put on crit boost level 3, offensive guard, and dragon with a secondary skill. It could be crit element, it could be handicraft, depending on how much sharpness you have on the weapon, or you could even replace this dragon decoration and once again put crit boost level 2 to achieve crit boost 5 for that juicy 40% damage on critical hits, which overall I think would allow you to deal more damage. But again, elemental damage is going to depend on the monsters that you are attacking more so than the element you have on your build instead, so you should keep that in mind. And then for the rest of the elements, it's pretty much the same thing. As you can see, I have my Thunder Sword and Shield with 5 levels of crit boost, offensive guard, and 1 level of thunder attack, and you can replace the crit boost with thunder attack handicraft, for example, thunder attack crit element, and honestly just do this with every element you have for the Artian weapons and you're going to work fine. So here on my Fire Sword and Shield, I have crit boost 3, offensive guard 3 with handicraft 1, and fire attack 3 with crit element 1. And again, remember to get as many attack infusions as possible, as the elemental infusions don't really add up as much damage as, in my opinion, they should. And then for my final build, I have a very simple and comfortable build that is all about dealing good damage, having a good amount of affinity, but also having some survivability and added comfort. And that is to go with a very similar setup to what we have already been running, but we're actually going to go with 2 pieces from Guardian Arcveld. So we have the Guardian Ebony Helmet, Arc Vulcan Mail, Guardian Arcveld Vambraces, Guardian Guardian Arc-Veld Coil, and the Udra Greaves with the Exploiter Charm. We then add 3 Mighty Jewels and a couple of Chain Jewels, and we end up again with Offensive Guard 3, Weakness Exploit 5, Burst level 5 and Maximum Might level 5. We have a lot of damage from these 4 skills alone, and we also get the aforementioned Flare level 2, which is quite powerful, and because we are running a 2-piece Guardian Arc-Veld, we get the Decimator set bonus, which allows you to restore health whenever you destroy a monster's wound. For that reason, we're actually running 2 Medicine Jewels to allow us to reach Recovery up level 2, which will actually increase the amount of health that we get from destroying said wounds. We also have Divine Blessing level 3, because again it's a fantastic skill that you can get very cheap, and honestly you can run this build with just about any weapon, so just pick your favorite sword and shield, whatever the element may be, or if you want to pick a random element as well, that is totally going to work with this build. And honestly, this is the build that I would recommend for everyone to play with a sword and shield, because it is just a lot of fun, incredibly reliable, does a lot of damage, and you have the added sustainability of having the Decimator set bonus. Genuinely, the damage difference between this set and the ones I showed you previously is not going to be that big of a deal. It's going to be a very minor difference, and again, you have the added benefit of just being able to heal by dealing damage. So unless you are someone that likes to go for the absolute most damage possible and likes to reset runs and try to achieve a sub 4 minutes tempered Arc-Veld, for example, then this is the build that I would recommend you to go for, as it's incredibly effective and has virtually no downsides. And these have been my 5 favorite builds for the sword and shield. A lot of meta builds, but also a few different options that you can customize and have some additional comfort. And as I mentioned, at the moment some of these skills are bugged, so if there is a change that we get through patch notes, and if there are significant things that need to be tweaked, I'll make a new video going over the new different builds, but these are in my opinion the best builds for the sword and shield. I'm going to be making a lot more of these for the different weapons, so let me know which weapon I should cover next. With that being said, my name is Dark Hero, thank you all so much for watching, and as always, happy hunting!